Because it has been mentioned in this regard, but I'm afraid we will. Okay, let's make a transitional point to the point number 7 in agenda. I will, as one of the co-rapporteurs, I will start my introductory speech expressing the situation and assessment of the situation about electoral reform. Dear colleagues, as you know, new government has announced that electoral reform is one of their key priorities. It has been written in the governmental program adopted in May by Armenian Parliament. Unfortunately, the preparation of electoral code has been done in the manner which excluded the major political oppositional forces from the drafting of this law. Republican Party of Armenia, as a major parliamentary opposition force, were out of this process. Unfortunately, the electoral code has been drafted exclusively by the government. They took some recommendations from the parliamentary committee, but the preparation itself has been done by the executive power. Unfortunately, according to the Venice Commission President official statement as well, this kind of very important and vital for any democracy document is not reflecting the position of all political forces. There is no political consensus about new electoral code. There is no Venice Commission expertise and assessment and evaluation of the Venice Commission on new electoral code. There is only political desire to organize the snap elections as soon as possible, according to the new electoral code, and they try to push electoral code through the parliament even after the fail that government had this week. Government proposed electoral code reform to the parliament, and parliament rejected it 2 days ago. But the governmental parties will continue to push this question through the parliament, and the biggest quarrel is about timing. Venice Commission recommendations are very strict in this regard. Minor changes of electoral code could be done any time, but according to the Venice Commission, the major changes of electoral code couldn't be implemented in preceding year towards elections. So if we have elections in December, it's impossible, it's not democratic, it's not comprehensive, it's not inclusive, it's not European to make major changes to the electoral code at the end of October. If you have elections in December, you can't change electoral code in October. So this is not a question of electoral reform which could be considered good or bad. It's not a question at all. The draft law is much better than the current one, considered to be much better than the current one, but it's not the proper timing for the electoral code reforms. So it's impossible to democratically combine political decision to organize snap elections in December with a political decision to push by all means new electoral code through parliament, even operating using pressure on the parliamentarian forces and the individual MPs. So this is the current stage that we have about electoral reform. On Monday, 2 parliamentary forces will launch the extraordinary sitting of the parliament. I think the only question of agenda will be electoral code reform again. Pro-governmental political parties and government itself will try by all means to push new electoral code through the parliament, but even if they succeed, even if the result is gained, new electoral code will not be considered by the Republican Party of Armenia, by many European institutions, I hope, as a democratically proved, because, as I told you, there is no political consensus, and even the most charismatic and most prominent political leader in Armenia is not allowed to break the traditions of European democracy and push the electoral code to be adopted in the parliament 45 days before parliamentary elections. Please consider on your national level what could you do in your countries, in Finland, in Czech Republic, in UK, in Spain, in Italy, if government decides to make electoral reform 45 days before elections. What will happen in your countries? What would you say instead of us if there is such kind of political decision by the governmental side to use the revolutionary euphoria and to push so-called democratic reform by anti-democratic means? So how you could believe to the democracy in Armenia, how can I believe into the democracy in Armenia if this democracy is they try to build by anti-democratic means? So this is a main address from a main oppositional party that I represent. Electoral code could be adopted next week, but without political consensus and without positive feedback from Republican Party of Armenia. We consider anti-democratic changing of electoral rules before 45 days before elections or 50 days before elections. I call you to understand the situation. Please consider this reform on your national level. What would happen in your countries if the government tried to change rules of game during the game already? So this is the main topic of our rejection of this approach. As to the other political developments in Armenia, so so-called Velvet Revolution still giving hope for the better country that we had before, if leadership of this revolution, so-called revolution, understands that this energy and societal support should be transformed into concrete actions, into reforms, if they diminish the degree of political intolerance, hate speeches, and not friendly environment toward opposition, if they try to make more inclusive political mechanisms and engage all political forces which are able to be part of this success story to build better Armenia. So I try to be more diplomatic because I understand clearly that Armenia is facing not only the local problems but also the problems of the regional security. So as an opposition, we don't want to undermine by our criticism and by our actions national security and stability of Armenia in the region. So this is the point where we will stop our domestic quarrels and we will stand next to the government and next to the people of Nagorno-Karabakh and next to the state institutions to keep our national interests in priority list on the top. But despite that, the democracy in Armenia could be at risk if upcoming parliamentary elections becoming a turning point for building another political monopoly in Armenia. So we should do our best to keep political pluralism, multi-party democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of media. None of the revolutions is allowed to clean up all the constitutional guarantees that we have about the division of the power, separation and balance of the power, about the human rights, fundamental freedoms. So I do appreciate the work where our current Armenian leadership has done to become a power, but I will not appreciate the efforts and all means they want to implement to stay as a power. So this is very important momentum for Armenian democracy, and I do believe that European observers will be part of this process if we are talking about snap elections, I do hope that international observation missions will be invited in due time. Unfortunately, you will not be able, you and ODIHR of OSCE will not be able to exercise long-term observation mission, which is also very important to have. I am very sorry to say it, but I remember the criticism when other Eastern Partnership countries tried to bring elections forward and to shorten the observation missions. I am afraid that we will have, so I call European institutions, European Parliament, to do your best to provide a proper observation mission for Armenian parliamentary elections. And start this mission as soon as possible. Please start your mission investigating the media coverage of Armenia now, investigating the current political situation in my country, to give a proper and balanced and fair assessment of these upcoming elections. Democracy is not only the leadership or the rights of the majority, but the real European democracy is also the system where the rights of minority are guaranteed and kept. So we do hope that Armenia will have such kind of democratic statute where the rights for political minority should be kept and guaranteed by the current leadership. I did my speech a little bit more provocative to make our discussions more interesting and more engaging. Now I am giving floor to Mr. Edmond Marokian, leader of the Bright Armenia political party, representing